We are in Middos Perek Gimel Mishnah Ches, and we're learning about the Ulam. Let's go back to our famous diagram 3. And this is a diagram that you should memorize, not memorize every single name, but memorize it, keep it in your minds. This is our Beis Hamikdash. Around the walls, the white area is the Harabayas. If I enter the Harabayas from the east, I went through the Shushan Habira gate. I then went through the wall, which is called the Soreg, beyond which Gentiles could not go. Between the Soreg wall and the Ezras Nashim, there was the area of 10 Amos called the Chayil. So I walked through the Chayil. I then walked through the Ezras Nashim, which was 135 by 135. I went up the 15 steps where the Levium sang during the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. I then walked through Shar Nicanor, the eastern gate, into the Azara. I walked into the Ezras Yisrael. If permitted, I went into the Ezras Kohanim. I then had the Mizbeach. To the north of the Mizbeach was the Beis HaMikbachayim, where they slaughtered the animals. After the Mizbeach, we learned yesterday, there were 22 amos from the wall, western wall of the Mizbeach until you got to this. There's 22 amos from the western wall of the Mizbeach until you get to this rectangular structure, the Ulam. And here there were 12 steps. And then I entered the Ulam. From the Ulam, I entered the Heichel. The Heichel has the table, the Shulchan that has the Lechem upon him. It has the menorah, and it has the small Mizbeach for incense. I continued walking west again, if you're permitted, and there's a partition. Behind there, the Kohen Gadol went once here, and that's the Kodesh HaKadoshim. This square, if it's a square, it's 187 by 135, is called the Azara. This is the Ezras Nashim. Memorize this picture. Harabayas, Soreg, Chayil, Ezras Nashim, 15 steps, Shar Nicanor, Ezras Yisrael, Ezras Kohanim, Mizbeach, Bein HaUlam VaMizbeach, between the Ulam and the Mizbeach, 12 steps, in Ulam, in Heichel, in Kodesh Kadoshim. Memorize that. And memorize the picture. So today, we're going to focus at the beginning of the Mishnah on this rectangular building, which is called the Ulam. And yesterday we learned on page 53 of your Mishnayos that the Ulam, in diagram 28, the Ulam had an opening which was double the size of the other openings in the Beis HaMikdash. All the openings were 20 amos tall, 10 amos wide. The door to the Ulam was double. Instead of 20 by 10, it was 40 amos high and 20 amos wide. The height of the Ulam, it's this rectangular building. The rectangular building, it's a rectangle. It is 11 amos wide, and it rose to the height of 100 amos. It was a very tall building. So its width, its width meaning it's going from east to west. The width of this building is 11 amos. And the walls of the Ulam rose up 100 amos. It was a very tall building. And it had no second floor or attic to it. This was 100 amos high building. And we're going to learn about today how you need some kind of support for a wall that's 100 amos high so that it doesn't collapse. And we'll get to that in today's Mishnah. This is the building that we're in. It's 40 by 20. We learned yesterday about the Malteros, the decorations that were above the door. The door is 40 high, 20 wide. The first board is 22. There are 5 boards, 22, 24, 26, 28. And the top board had a length of, or width of 30. And these were decorative boards on top of the opening of the ulam. So now we're in Perek Gimel Mishnah Ches. Uklunsos shel erez, hoyu kavua mikoslo shel heichel lekoslo shel ulam. The Mishnah now is focusing us on the heichel, which means we don't know what the ulam was used for yet, but the Mishnah is now, as we've learned, going from east to west. And now we're going from the ulam into the next chamber. The next chamber is called the heichel. And again, the heichel is split into 2 pieces. The first part, although it's not half, the first part has the small mizbeach for ketores incense. It also has the shulchan for the lechem aponim. Bear that in mind, the lechem aponim is in this chamber. And the menorah that was lit each evening. So we're now going to focus on the opening right here, the opening into the heichel. We've discussed already the opening into the ulam, 12 steps to the opening. The opening was 40 by 20. We mentioned yesterday that this opening was like no other opening. First of all openings were 20 by 10 and had doors. The ulam opening right here is 40 by 20 and did not have a door. It had a curtain only of 40 by 20. We've now walked into the ulam, and now we want to go into the heichel for those who are permitted to go there. To go into the heichel, you have a door here, the door of the heichel, not the door of the ulam. It doesn't have a door, it has a curtain. We've walked through the curtain. We've walked through the ulam, we now want to walk into the heichel. If you're a Kohen, you want to go into the heichel because you want to light the menorah. You want to go into the heichel because you want to bring the incense that was brought every day. Or you want to go into the heichel on Shabbos to deal with the lechem aponim. In order to get into the heichel, you have to go through a door. That is the door that this Mishnah is talking about now, not the door of the ulam. And now the Mishnah describes the door of the heichel. Going back to diagram 28, it's a little confusing, but we can explain it. This diagram 28 actually shows you 2 different entrances, because that's how they were able to draw the picture. The first entrance is a huge entrance. This is the ulam. It is 40 high, 20 wide. And it has these decorative boards above it. This door that they're showing you here is not the door of the ulam. The ulam has no door, it has a curtain. And that's the curtain they're showing you here. This is a make-believe picture. They're making believe that you walked through the curtain, walked 11 amos, and now got to the door of the heichel. And this is now the door of the heichel. So between this curtain and this door, you have to imagine that there are 11 amos between the curtain and the door. And those are the 11 amos that made up the rectangular structure called ulam. So now we are at the door of the heichel. The door of the heichel, you can see, is 20 by 10 rather than 40 by 20. It's half the size of the ulam door. Again, the ulam is a curtain, and you walked 11 amos in, and you got to the heichel door. So you have to imagine 11 amos between curtain and door. So the Mishnah is now describing this door, and this gold that's on top of the door, and this little window, there are 2 of them, that has a crown in it, that is above the door of the heichel. It's a bit confusing. This gold looks like a gold vineyard. This gold vineyard, this window with a crown, and this door are to the heichel, not the ulam, which is a curtain. Having said that, we can now take a look at Mishnah Ches. Uklunaso shel erez hayu kavua mikoslo shel heichal lekoslo shel ulam kidei shelo yivad. To make sure, as we said, that the walls of the ulam don't collapse. The ulam, we said, was 100 amas high. So you can build two walls that are 100 amas high and have the first floor, and then build the second floor. And the floor that makes up the second floor, which is also the ceiling of the first floor, that floor is a support so that the two walls don't collapse. Right? You build a floor between the 100 amos, and the floor not only creates level 1 and level 2, but the floor, which is the ceiling to the first floor, actually supports the two walls. What happens if you build two walls 100 amos high with nothing in between them? There's a danger they can simply fall in and collapse. So the Mishnah says that they took klunso shel erez, boards or pillars that were made out of erez, and they set them in between the walls of the ulam and the heichal. If we go back to our imagination picture, 28, between the curtain and the door, the curtain of the ulam and the door of the heichal, there's 11 amos. In that 11 amos, they put up boards or pillars or beams of wood that went from the wall of the ulam and went 11 amos to the wall of the heichal. These pillars or beams were put above the door of the ulam. The door of the ulam is 40 high, so approximately 10 amos higher than that, approximately at 50 amos, they put in beams of erez, cedar wood, and they put in these beams across the 11 amos. From the ulam wall to the heichal wall, they put in these beams, and that created a support between the two walls. This is shown to you, again, not the greatest picture, on diagram 29A. They're showing you the curtain of the ulam, and there's a make-believe picture, a cutout. This cutout is showing you this wall here is wall of ulam. This wall inside is wall of heichal, 11 amas deep into it. And they're showing you that these boards were put in, these beams were put in between the two walls. Wall of ulam, 11 amos later, wall of heichal, and these beams supported the two walls so they would not fall in. Again, the question gets raised, as we've seen several times, there's not supposed to be wood built into the Beis HaMikdash. We learned this out from a pasuk, and we have the same answer here. Either, according to the Vilna Gaon, it was not prohibited. It's only prohibited to use wood in a way that looks like a tree, growing up and down. If you cannot insert any wood into the Beis HaMikdash that's going up and looks like a tree. Look like a tree, I mean that it's just going up rather than side to side. Since these boards were going side to side, from a wall of ulam to wall of heichal, there was no prohibition. And there are other answers as well. That's the first part of the Mishnah about these beams between wall of ulam, wall of heichal. Again, between wall of ulam and wall of heichal, there are 11 amos. We come to a very, very interesting point in the Mishnah now. B'shar shiroi shel zav hayu kavuos betikras ha'ulam. First, there were chains. There were golden chains. You don't have this picture. I'm going to just show it to you on a diagram of my Mishnayos. Just literally gold chains. Chains were hanging from the ceiling of the ulam. Now remember, the ceiling of the ulam is 100 amas high. And these chains are hanging down almost to the ground of the ulam. And the purpose of these chains amazingly, was so that young Kohanim can climb up the chains. What were they climbing up the chains for? So the Mishnah tells us, chains of gold were fastened into the ceiling of the ulam. Shebahem pirchei kahuna olim. On these chains, the young Kohanim can climb. Veroin et ha'atarot. They can see the two crowns. If you take a look, we mentioned that there are windows above the door of the heichal, not the ulam. Let's go back to diagram 28. We're looking at two entrances, and we're imagining that there's 11 amos between the two. The curtain, the huge opening, 40 by 20, is opening to ulam with a curtain. 11 amos deeper, there is a door which is 20 by 10 for the heichal. And above the heichal, there were two windows. Each window has a crown in it. And the Pirchei Kuna, the young Kohanim, would climb up, and they'd want to take a look at these two crowns. What are these two crowns, and why are they so important to look at? Shenemar, the pasuk tells us in Zechariah, it's talking about the building of the second Beis Hamikdash. V'ha'atoros tiyeh, the crown shall be L'chelam. These are names of people. The first person is Chelam, Ula Tovia. Tovia is the name of the second person. Vilidaya. Lidaya is the name of the third person. Ulachen ben Tzefanya. And Techen, the son of Tzefanya. These are four people. L'zikorim beheichal Hashem. And they shall be remembered forever in the heichal of Hashem. So this is the heichal. We're not talking about ulam. We're talking about the door. And above there are two windows and the two crowns. What's the story behind these two crowns? When the Jews came back from Bavel to build the second Beis Hamikdash, the Rebbe Shalom told Zechariah, this is part of the pasuk that's quoted in the Mishnah, he told Zechariah, I want you to go to these four Jews, Chelam, Tovia, Yedaya, Lidaya, and Chen. I want you to go to them. And they have gold. And they want to donate the gold to the Beis Hamikdash. I know that, God tells Zechariah. They want to donate the gold to the Beis Hamikdash. I want you to go to them and tell them that you're ready to take the gold and you're going to build two crowns with the gold. One crown is going to be used to be put on the head of Zerubbabel. For those of you who have never heard of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel was a grandson of Yechaniah. Yechaniah was a king of Yehuda. He was a scion of King David. And he was next to the last king of the Jewish people before the Babylonians destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. Yechaniah, after Yechaniah was Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu was the last Jewish king during the period of the first Beis Hamikdash. While Tzidkiyahu was king, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and that was the end of kingship. Yechaniah was the king before Tzidkiyahu, a scion of David. Yechaniah's grandson is a person named Zerubbabel, and we see him in different places in Nevi'im. Zerubbabel was designated by God as a scion of David, the grandson of Yechaniah, to become, quote unquote, the Nasi. Why didn't he become king? That's a separate conversation. There were no kings. Kings ended with Tzidkiyahu. After Tzidkiyahu, the next person who was going to lead the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael with the building of the second Beis Hamikdash is Yechaniah's grandson Zerubbabel. In order to coronate Zerubbabel, they made a crown, and they put the crown on his head for his coronation, not as king, but as what we call him, a Nasi. This crown was put on his head. That's one crown that was made from the gold of these four people. The second crown was put on the head of the Kohen Gadol to sort of coronate him as the new Kohen Gadol for the second Beis Hamikdash. Once these crowns were put on Zerubbabel and the Kohen Gadol, they were taken and they were put in these two windows in diagram 28. Those are the two crowns. One was at one time on the head of Zerubbabel, one was at one time on the head of the Kohen Gadol, and this was a reminder to the Jewish people of the miracle of the second Beis Hamikdash, that there's the history of Zerubbabel, the first Nasi of the second Beis Hamikdash, and the first Kohen Gadol of the second Beis Hamikdash. And the young Kohanim would climb up. The Mefarshim say the old Kohanim didn't climb up for one or two reasons. Either because they had already seen the crowns when they were young Kohanim, or old people have difficulty climbing up chains. So either way, whatever the pshat in the Mishnah is, the young Kohanim had these chains. They were able to climb up and take a look at these crowns and thank the Ribono Shel Olam for the miracle of the second Beis Hamikdash, which started with the coronation of Zerubbabel and the Kohen Gadol. So in the Ulam, we're in the Ulam, and Ulam is 100 amas high. There are these golden chains coming down so that the young Kohanim can climb up and look at the crowns. Where were the crowns? Not in the Ulam. The crowns were in the next chamber. They were on the top of the door of the Heichal. So you look at again, 28, Ulam, curtain. Imagine 11 amos deep, wall of the Heichal, door of the Heichal. In the wall of the Heichal, on top of the door, two windows and the two crowns. And that's what the Mishnah is describing. Now the Mishnah tells us a little more about the Ulam, about the Heichal. We're in the next chamber. Going back to our diagram 3. We just learned about the Ulam. This is 100 amas high, and it had beams going from east to west between the Ulam wall and the Heichal wall to hold it. Inside this chamber, from the ceiling, 100 amas high, there were chains coming down so the Kohanim can climb up and see the two crowns that were on this wall, which is the wall of the Heichal. Above the door of the Heichal, two windows, two crowns. So we're right here now. We're no longer in Ulam, we're at the opening to the Heichal. And now at the opening of the Heichal, you go back to 28, the opening of Heichal. We've walked 11 imaginary amos in, and we see the two crowns. And above the crowns, above the door of this Heichal, not the curtain, the Heichal, there was this gold vineyard, which we mentioned earlier. What was this gold vineyard here on top of the door to the Heichal? The Mishnah now tells us, Gefen shel zahav hoisa omedes al piso shel Heichal. A golden vineyard was built on top of the opening of the Heichal, umeduldala al gabe klonosos, and it was held and supported by, again, type of wooden beams. If you take a look, you don't have this picture, again, in my Mishnah, if you take a look at this picture, you can see gold, looks like grapes of vineyard, and they had sort of two poles, two beams, and then like a rectangular structure. If you go ever drive past a vineyard, you'll see the way grapes grow. They put different sticks or beams or sometimes small gates, and the grapes grow around and through these fences. So this was a gold vineyard. Where did it come from? The Mishnah tells us. Kol mi shehu misnadev ole, o gagir, o eshkol, mevi v'tolaba. If a person wanted to donate gold to the second Beis Hamikdash, he can come and donate gold, and there was a storage place in the Beis Hamikdash for this gold, silver, etc. And there was a gizbor, a treasurer, who was in charge of this. But sometimes people came to the Beis Hamikdash and said, I would like to bring gold and donate it to the golden vineyard. And sometimes there was enough gold that they gave, that there was enough gold to form it into, melt it, mold it into a leaf, an olive, or gargir. There was enough gold to mold it, melt it, whatever, take the gold and make it into a grape, or eshkol. Or there was enough gold that there was a lot more gold. There was a whole cluster of grapes. And these leaves, grapes or clusters of grapes, would be put on, as you can see in diagram 28, they would form a whole vineyard. Now, what would they do with this gold? Okay. Inside the Heichel, back to diagram 3. Inside this Heichel, Ulam Heichel, these walls were covered with gold. It's an amazing amount of gold. But these walls in this area were made of gold. They were built and then they put gold on the walls to cover the walls. Sometimes gold chips, sometimes a piece fell off, sometimes they needed to add new gold. Where did they get the gold from to reseal the walls in the Heichel? They would take a grape or a cluster or a leaf off this gold vineyard, melt it, and make it now part of the wall of the Heichel. So there were some people that came to the Beis HaMikdash and said, I want to donate gold, here it is, do whatever you need to do with it. There were other people that came to the Beis HaMikdash and said, I want my gold to be used as part of the walls of the Heichel. Well, the Heichel are gold already. In order to use the gold and beautify the Heichel, they would make the vineyard above the wall of the Heichel, and as necessary, they would take a grape or a cluster or a leaf off, melt it, and fix the wall inside the Heichel. The Mishnah now continues, Amar Rebbe Elazar b'Rebbe Tzadok, Rebbe Elazar b'Rebbe Tzadok says, Ma'aseh Hoya. There was even an event that dealt with this vineyard. We're on page 54 of the Mishnayos. Ma'aseh Hoya, there was in fact an event. V'nimnu oleh shlosh meos kohanim. There was an event where they had to remove this whole structure of the vineyard with the poles. For whatever reason, they removed it. Question what caused them to remove it. Of course, they brought it back, but they had to remove it temporarily. And it was so heavy with gold, it took 300 kohanim to lift this up and move it. Well, that's a lot of kohanim to be, that you can imagine the weight that's necessary. Now, we're going to pause here for a moment. The commentaries tell us, the Gemara tells us, the commentaries to the Mishnah bring this down. There are 3 places in Shas where Chazal, we're not allowed to say necessarily the word exaggerate, but the Gemara calls it guzma. They wanted to emphasize the point, so they use numbers that are not precise. I want the Mishnah, and this is one of the 3 places. The Mishnah wants to emphasize how much gold was donated to the Beis HaMikdash by people. They said when they needed to move this structure, it took 300 kohanim to move it. Did it take 300? Maybe it took 100. Maybe it took 89. Maybe it took 200. But 300 is a number that was used to emphasize the tremendous weight and human power that was needed to move this structure. I want to say one more thing about the ulam, the rectangular structure. We don't know exactly what it was used for yet, but I'm going to provide you now with one of the uses. In this rectangular structure, there were 2 tables. One was made of gold, and one was made of shayish. And these tables were used to facilitate the lechem haponim. In the Heichel, this is ulam, rectangular structure. You walk from ulam into Heichel, which is made up of 2 rooms, the Kodesh Kadoshim with the Oren in the back, and in the front you have the small mizbech for incense, the menorah, and the shulchan. The shulchan has the 12 special chalos on it. What did they do with these chalos? The chalos were baked on Friday. Baking the challah was not docha Shabbos. You were not allowed to bake the challah on Shabbos. These challahs were baked on Erev Shabbos. These hot challahs were then placed on the shayish table. They were hot challah. Remember, we learned about this earlier this week about the meat. The meat was put on a table that was out of a wooden block. An animal, after it's slaughtered, it's hot. The body's heated up. You do not want to take that heated body and put it on a piece of gold or silver, which will further heat up the meat. And there's no refrigeration in the Beis Hamikdash. And we talked then a couple of days ago about the Nes, and ain't somchen al Nes. So when these new challahs that were baked on Friday were needed to be stored, they stored them on a gold, on the shayish table that was in this ulam. And shayish cools things down. And these breads, remember, whole separate miracle, there was smoke that rose from these breads. We'll talk about that in a moment. What did they do with this bread that was baked on a Friday? It stayed there until Shabbos afternoon. On Shabbos afternoon, Kohanim went through the ulam into the heichal, and they went into the heichal with the 12 new baked breads from yesterday, Friday. They took them off the shayish table, and they brought them into the heichal. They removed the 12 breads that were already there from last Shabbos, put the new bread, the new 12 breads on the shulchan that would stay there until the following Shabbos, and the breads that were removed would be taken into the ulam and put on the gold table. So the fresh challah that was baked on Friday was put on the shayish table in the ulam. It stayed there until Shabbos afternoon to go into the heichal and put it on the shulchan. The bread that was from the previous Shabbos or the previous Friday was taken out of the ulam, out of the heichal, and put on the gold table in the ulam until it can be distributed amongst the Kohanim. Obviously, the miracle that we spoke about many times of the lechem haponim is that the lechem haponim was baked on Friday. They brought it into the heichal and put it on the shulchan the next day Shabbos. Those 12 challahs were not eaten until the following Shabbos. That's 9 days. And we learn out of a pasuk that it was the smoke was rising from these challahs the entire 9 days as if you just took them out of the oven. The Gemara learns this out from a pasuk. So this was a tremendous miracle inside the Beis Hamikdash. You baked challah on Friday. You put it into the ulam on the shayish table. The next day, Shabbos, you put it on the shulchan. You would not eat that lechem until the following Shabbos. And it was 9 days old, and it was fresh, and smoke still rising from it as if it had just been taken out of the oven. And that's the lechem haponim. So one thing we know about the ulam is it had these two tables, gold and shayish. The shayish table was used to store the new baked challah from Friday to Shabbos afternoon, and the gold table was used to take out the challah from the lechem haponim from the heichal, put it on the gold table on Shabbos until it could be distributed to the Kohanim on Shabbos. So that brings us to the conclusion for this cycle of Perek Gimel of Masechta Middos. Yetz Hashem, tomorrow we'll begin Perek Dalet, the fourth Perek of Middos, and it'll begin discussing the Heichal itself, which is where we're up to. We just discussed the opening of the Heichal, where there was this gold vineyard and two crowns in the wall of the opening above the door of the Heichal. And now we're going to go into the Heichal. We're going to learn about the doors of the Heichal, and we're going to keep on moving westward. So Masechta Middos has 5 chapters. We've already, Baruch Hashem, completed 3. We'll begin chapter 4 tomorrow, and Be'ezrat Hashem, after Shavuos, we'll be able to make a siyum on Masechta Middos and have built a Beis Hamikdash that the Rebbeinu Shalom will bless and give us the Beis Hamikdash as we have built it